When a dying wild Mustang looked into the eyes of a broken-down herding dog, neither knew they were about to defy every law of nature. Their impossible bond would heal two shattered souls, create a miracle that stunned veterinarians, and prove that love transcends every boundary, until the morning that would test whether some connections are stronger than death itself. Max had been Montana's finest herding dog for 8 years, his black and white coat a blur of precision across the Patterson Ranch. The border collie with one striking blue eye and one warm brown had earned the respect of every rancher in the valley, moving cattle with an intelligence that seemed almost supernatural. But at 9 years old, arthritis had stolen more than his mobility. It had stolen his purpose. The diagnosis hit Tom Patterson harder than it hit Max. The weathered rancher watched his faithful companion drag himself to his favorite spot by the barn, no longer able to chase, herd, or work. The three things that defined every fiber of a border collie's existence. Max's brilliant eyes had dimmed, not from physical pain, but from something far more devastating, the slow death of a soul without purpose. "He's dying inside, Sarah," Tom confided to his wife one evening, watching Max stare blankly at the younger dogs racing across the pasture. A border collie without work is like a bird with clipped wings. They had tried everything. Fetch games lasted mere minutes before Max's swollen joints forced him to quit. The younger ranch dogs instinctively excluded him, sensing his inability to keep up with their boundless energy. Day after day, Max lay motionless by the barn, his magnificent mind deteriorating alongside his failing body. The dog who once commanded respect from 1,000-pound bulls now couldn't even summon the energy to chase away the barn cats from his food bowl. Spring arrived with unusual violence that year. A wild Mustang mare, heavy with foal and desperate beyond measure, had stumbled onto Patterson land. Blood streaked her flank where barbed wire had torn deep gashes, and exhaustion made her stumble with each labored step. Tom found her collapsed by the creek, too weak to run, too proud to surrender to human help. "She won't make it through the night," the veterinarian said, after examining the mare's infected wounds. "The infection spread too far, but she's close to foaling. Maybe we can save the baby if we move fast." From his usual spot by the barn, Max watched them bring the dying mare into the shelter. Something about her desperate struggle pierced through the fog of his depression. Against his body's protests, he limped closer to the stall, whimpering softly, the first sound of genuine emotion he'd made in months. The mare lifted her magnificent head, meeting Max's mismatched eyes through the wooden slats. In that electric moment, two souls drowning in their own kind of despair recognized something profound in each other. Pain spoke to pain. Loneliness called to loneliness. Labor began that night, with brutal intensity. Max refused to leave the mare's side, positioning himself just outside her stall. His presence seemed to calm her violent thrashing, as if she drew strength from his quiet vigil. When the foal finally emerged, a tiny bay filly with a perfect white star blazing on her forehead, the mare had only minutes of life remaining. With her final breath, the dying mother touched her muzzle to her newborn baby, then turned her fading gaze to Max. The message transcended species barriers with crystal clarity. "Protect her. Love her. Be what I cannot be." As sunrise painted the Montana sky gold, the mare's eyes closed forever. The foal, barely dry and impossibly fragile, struggled to stand on legs that seemed far too long for her tiny body. She was utterly alone, orphaned in her first hour of existence, with no mother to teach her how to survive in a world that showed no mercy to the weak. That's when Max did something that would redefine the remainder of his days and challenge everything anyone thought they knew about the boundaries between species. Fighting through joint pain that would have crippled a lesser dog, he carefully entered the stall and lowered himself beside the shivering orphan. The foal pressed instinctively against his warm fur, seeking comfort her mother could no longer provide. Max's tail curved protectively around her trembling body, and he began cleaning her with gentle licks, exactly as her mother would have done. Tom stood frozen in the doorway, witnessing something that defied natural law. Max, the retired herding dog with no purpose left to live for, had just discovered his reason to fight again, and the foal, who should have been terrified of a natural predator, had found her unlikely guardian. "Well, I'll be damned," Tom whispered, his voice thick with wonder. "Looks like Max just became a mother." The foal needed a name, and Sarah suggested Star for the white marking that blazed across her forehead like a beacon. But Max had already decided. Every time someone approached his charge, he'd position himself protectively and make a distinctive sound, a soft roo-roo that bore an uncanny resemblance to the name that would stick Ruby. Max's transformation happened overnight, defying every veterinary prediction about his condition. The arthritis that had sentenced him to a life of painful immobility seemed to vanish as he devoted himself completely to Ruby's survival. Before dawn each morning, he'd drag his aching body to her stall, inspecting every inch of her for signs of distress or injury. When Tom arrived with bottles of mare's milk replacer, Max became Ruby's living support system. He'd steady her wobbling legs with his body, helping her coordinate the complex mechanics of nursing. His patient guidance turned feeding time from a desperate struggle into a coordinated dance between species. "I've never witnessed anything like this," Dr. Martinez admitted during Ruby's first veterinary checkup. "He's actually teaching her how to be a horse." It was true, and it was miraculous. Max demonstrated everything Ruby needed to survive: how to walk despite his own painful limp, where to find the cleanest water, which hay offered the best nutrition. He'd nudge her away from dangers a foal wouldn't naturally recognize, his herding instincts channeling into fierce protection. When Ruby attempted her first unsteady run, Max hobbled alongside her, barking encouragement like a proud parent cheering at a school race. His joints screamed in protest, but his spirit soared with purpose. The other ranch dogs maintained their distance, confused by Max's obsession with this four-legged creature that towered over him. But Max didn't care about their judgment. He'd found something more valuable than their acceptance. He'd found his calling. Not herding cattle, but raising a horse who thought she was part dog. Sleep became a luxury. Max gladly sacrificed. He spent nights in Ruby's stall, his black and white fur perpetually covered in hay and dust. When nightmares plagued her, crying out for a mother who would never answer, Max would press his warm body against her trembling flanks until peace returned. By her third week of life, Ruby followed Max everywhere his deteriorating joints would allow him to go. The sight became legendary throughout the valley. A limping border collie, leading a gangly Mustang foal, around the ranch like she was an oversized, confused sheep. Ruby absorbed Max's herding commands with startling intelligence. "Come by, Ruby." Max would bark, and the foal would circle right away, and she'd move left with the precision of a trained working dog. Ranch visitors couldn't believe their eyes as Max herded his singular charge around the paddock, teaching her discipline and boundaries no horse mother could have provided. But it was their quiet moments that revealed the true depth of their extraordinary bond. Ruby would lower her head so Max could reach her face, standing perfectly still during grooming sessions that sometimes lasted an hour. When arthritis flares left Max whimpering in pain, she'd lie down beside him, reversing their roles. The baby becoming the comforter. Tom documented everything, sensing he was witnessing something that might never happen again in human history. His videos captured Max teaching Ruby to navigate obstacles, to respond to verbal commands, to trust humans because he trusted them completely. The foal was learning to be a horse from a dog. And somehow, impossibly, it was working to perfection. She thinks she's part border collie. Sarah laughed one afternoon, watching Ruby attempt to crouch low like Max when stalking a butterfly. And Max thinks he's part horse. The transformation in Max defied medical explanation. His eyes sparkled with renewed life, and he moved with purpose that made pain irrelevant. Every morning brought the same ritual, circling Ruby to check for injuries, sniffing her breath for signs of illness, then grooming her face until she nickered with mock annoyance at his fuss. Ruby thrived under his unconventional care. At 1 month old, she displayed remarkable strength, confidence, and discipline that amazed everyone who met her. She'd wait for Max's permission before eating, responded to over a dozen voice commands, and showed an intelligence that seemed to bridge the gap between canine and equine thinking. But Tom noticed something troubling that others missed. Max was pushing himself beyond the limits of what his failing body could endure. The effort of keeping pace with a rapidly growing foal was extracting a terrible toll. Each night he'd collapse in exhaustion, joints swollen and breathing labor. Yet every morning he'd force himself up for Ruby, driven by love stronger than pain. "He's living for her," Tom confided to Sarah one evening, watching Max struggle to rise after a particularly active day. But at what cost? He's burning himself out to keep her alive. Summer arrived with Montana's full glory, bringing with it the golden days of Max and Ruby's impossible partnership. Ruby, now 3 months old, had grown strong and sure-footed under Max's devoted guidance. Their daily routine had become ranch legend. Each morning began with Max's special wake-up bark and Ruby's answering nicker of recognition. They patrolled the ranch together, Max setting a pace his arthritis could manage, Ruby matching it perfectly. She'd learned to walk slowly beside him, never rushing ahead despite her natural energy, as if she understood his physical limitations with heartbreaking intuition. "She's more trained than most yearlings," marveled Jennifer Walsh, a professional horse trainer who'd traveled from Billings to witness the unusual pair. "That dog has accomplished something incredible here." He's created a horse who thinks like a working dog. Max had indeed worked miracles. Ruby responded to voice commands with precision. Stay. Come. Down. Back up. She'd learned to open gates with her mouth after watching Max manipulate latches with his paws. When Max herded the chickens for exercise, Ruby helped, carefully stepping around the birds exactly as Max had taught her, but the clock was ticking, and everyone except Ruby could hear it counting down. Their favorite time became evening training sessions, where Max had created an elaborate obstacle course using ranch equipment scattered across the paddock. He'd guide Ruby through weaving poles, over small jumps, around barrels, all at his increasingly slow pace. The foal treated it like the grandest game imaginable, nickering with pure joy when she completed each circuit correctly. But it was their emotional connection during Montana's violent thunderstorms that truly amazed everyone who witnessed it. While most young horses would panic at the explosive sounds, Ruby had developed an extraordinary response. She'd find Max and stand protectively over him, shielding him from the driving rain while he comforted her with his steady presence. They'd created a communication system entirely their own. Specific barks carried different meanings, and Ruby had developed distinct nickers for responses only. Max understood. The ranch became a pilgrimage destination for locals wanting to witness this miracle firsthand. Children especially loved watching the old dog and young horse perform together. Max would demonstrate his herding commands, Ruby responding with perfect precision. Then they'd settle down together for photographs and gentle pets from amazed visitors. They're healing each other, Sarah observed one afternoon, watching Max carefully groom Ruby's legs while she dozed in the sunshine. He needed purpose. She needed a parent. Sometimes God works in the most mysterious way. Tom had built them a special shelter in the main pasture, with Max's bed elevated to ease the pressure on his deteriorating joints. Ruby's hay net hung positioned so she could eat while standing guard over her sleeping guardian. Many nights, Tom would discover them in this touching arrangement, Ruby standing sentinel while Max slept, their protective roles beautifully reversed. Dr. Martinez's monthly visits brought both wonder and growing concern. Max's mental stimulation is actually helping his physical condition, she explained to Tom and Sarah. And Ruby's emotional development is remarkable for an orphaned foal. They're keeping each other alive in more ways than anyone imagined possible. The highlight of their partnership came during the 4th of July ranch gathering. Max demonstrated Ruby's incredible training for a crowd of amazed neighbors. At his bark commands, she walked, trotted, stopped, backed up, turned in perfect circles, and even played dead, a trick Max had taught purely for entertainment. The crowd erupted in thunderous applause. "That's not a horse," declared old rancher Bill Thompson, shaking his weathered head in amazement. "That's a 600-pound border collie with hooves." But Tom saw what others missed in their celebration. Each performance cost Max dearly. His breathing had become increasingly labored, his limp more pronounced with every passing day. The devoted dog was pouring every ounce of his remaining energy into Ruby's education and care, giving her everything he had left. That night, as 4th of July fireworks exploded across the Montana sky, Tom found them in their shelter. Ruby stood protectively over Max, her powerful body shielding him from the bright lights he'd always feared. The old dog gazed up at his equine daughter with pure unconditional love, and she lowered her nose to touch his increasingly gray muzzle. It was a perfect moment, the kind that makes you desperately wish time could stop forever. August brought changes so subtle that only those who truly loved Max would notice them. His morning wake-up bark to Ruby came later each day. Their patrol routes grew shorter. The obstacle course training sessions happened less frequently, though Ruby would stand hopefully by the equipment, nickering for him to join her games. "He's fading," Tom told Sarah after watching Max struggle to rise one particularly difficult morning. Ruby had nudged him repeatedly, whimpering in her horse-like way when he couldn't immediately respond to her gentle urgings. Dr. Martinez's examination revealed the harsh truth they'd all been dreading. The arthritis had worsened significantly, but that wasn't the primary concern anymore. "His heart is working far too hard," she explained gently. "He's been pushing himself beyond any reasonable limits for months. Dogs are masters at hiding pain, but his body is beginning to shut down." Tom felt his throat constrict. "How long do we have?" "Hard to say with certainty. Could be weeks, could be months." Dr. Martinez paused, watching Max hobble slowly toward Ruby, who had been anxiously peering into the examination room. "But Tom, he's only hanging on for her now. His entire will to live is centered on that foal." They started Max on heart medication and stronger pain management. For a few precious days, he seemed revitalized. even managing a brief herding demonstration for Ruby's obvious delight. But everyone with eyes could see the devastating truth. Max was systematically fading away, one painful day at a time. Ruby knew. Her behavior underwent a heartbreaking transformation. Shifting from dependent foal to protective guardian, she positioned herself to block harsh winds from hitting Max's fragile body. When other animals approached their shared space, she stepped forward with pinned ears, assuming the guardian role that had once belonged entirely to him. One morning, Tom discovered them in an arrangement that shattered his heart completely. Max had been trying to reach Ruby's water trough for a desperately needed drink, but couldn't make the distance on his failing legs. Ruby had somehow figured out how to carry water in her mouth, dribbling it near Max so he could lap it from the ground. "She's returning every bit of care he gave her," Sarah whispered through streaming tears. "All those months he took care of her, and now she's taking care of him." Max's training sessions evolved into Ruby demonstrating everything she'd learned while he watched from his bed, too weak to participate, but too devoted to miss a moment. She'd run through the obstacle course alone, looking to him for approval after each element. His tail would manage the faintest wag, and she'd nicker with satisfaction before continuing her solo performance. Even the ranch dogs began visiting Max, something they'd rarely done during his all-consuming obsession with Ruby. They seemed to understand, with the mysterious intuition animals possess, that his time was running short. Even the normally aloof barn cats would curl up near him, offering their quiet, warm companionship. But Ruby remained his constant companion, leaving his side only when absolutely necessary for food or water. Tom installed a camera to monitor them through the increasingly difficult nights. The footage revealed Ruby's deepening understanding of Max's condition. When he whimpered in pain, she'd gently lip at his fur, mimicking months of his grooming care. When he struggled to stand, she'd carefully position her legs so he could lean against them for support. "He's completed his job," Dr. Martinez observed during what would be her final visit. "He's raised her, trained her, loved her completely. In his mind, his purpose is fulfilled. She's ready to be independent." But Ruby clearly wasn't ready to let go of the only parent she'd ever known. She began refusing to eat, unless Max ate first, wouldn't leave their shelter even for the lush pasture beyond. Her world had narrowed to a circle with Max at its center, just as his had once revolved entirely around her survival. One evening, in what seemed like a final surge of determination, Max managed to lead Ruby to their favorite spot, a small hill overlooking the ranch they both called home. They sat together watching the sunset, Ruby standing tall and strong while Max leaned heavily against her legs for support. To anyone watching from a distance, they looked like they were simply saying goodbye to another day. But Tom knew better. Max was saying goodbye to much more than the sunset. He was preparing Ruby in his own gentle way for the inevitable, teaching her one last, heartbreaking lesson: how to be strong when your heart is breaking into a million pieces. The old dog's breathing was severely labored, but his distinctive mismatched eyes remained bright and alert, fixed lovingly on his beloved foal. Ruby lowered her head until they touched nose to muzzle, holding that tender position as the sun disappeared behind the Montana mountains. It was the last sunset they would ever watch together. Max didn't get up the next morning. Ruby's increasingly frantic nickering brought Tom running to their shelter, his heart already knowing what he'd find. The old border collie lay motionless on his elevated bed, breathing shallow and labored, his distinctive blue and brown eyes focused solely on Ruby, with an intensity that spoke of final goodbyes. "Hey there, buddy," Tom whispered, kneeling beside his faithful friend. Max's tail moved slightly, not a wag, just acknowledgement. His gaze never wavered from Ruby, who pressed her nose against his side, whimpering in the way horses do when they sense devastating loss approaching. Dr. Martinez arrived within the hour, her examination gentle but conclusive. "He's in complete organ failure," she said softly, her professional composure cracking. "He's held on far longer than any dog should have been able to. He was waiting to make sure Ruby would be okay. He was waiting to say goodbye properly." Tom finished, his voice breaking completely. The decision no pet owner ever wants to make had arrived. But first, Max needed to complete his final act of love. With tremendous effort and Tom's supporting hands, Max stood one last time. Ruby immediately pressed against him, supporting his weight as she had learned to do during his worst day. Max looked up at his horse, his daughter in every way that truly mattered, and gave one soft bark. The same gentle Rubu sound he'd used to name her months ago. Ruby responded with her special nicker, the one reserved only for him, their private language speaking volumes in this moment of perfect understanding. Then Max did something that left everyone speechless. He began to walk, painfully but with unwavering determination, leading Ruby around the paddock one final time. It was their morning patrol. Abbreviated but absolutely essential. He showed her the water trough, the feed station, the safe spots to rest, reminding her of everything he'd taught her during their precious time together. At each familiar stop, he'd pause and look directly at her, as if saying, "Remember this. You know what to do. You'll be fine without me." Ruby followed solemnly, her usual playfulness replaced by an almost human understanding that this moment was sacred and final. Sarah had brought Max's favorite blanket outside, spreading it in the sunshine. When their last patrol ended, he collapsed onto it, utterly exhausted but somehow satisfied. Ruby lay down beside him, something she rarely did during daylight hours. She positioned her head so Max could rest his paw on her soft muzzle, their favorite comfort position through countless nights. The ranch community had gathered quietly. Word spreads quickly in small Montana towns, and those who'd witnessed the miracle of Max and Ruby came to pay their respects. Even the most hardened cowboys wiped away tears as the old dog struggled to keep his eyes open, still focused completely on his foal. "You did good, Max," Tom whispered, stroking the increasingly gray fur. "You did so incredibly good. She's going to be fine because of everything you taught her. You can rest now, boy. You've earned your peace." Max's breathing slowed dramatically. Ruby seemed to sense the change, nickering softly, a sound filled with love, gratitude, and heartbreaking loss. She groomed his face one final time with her velvet muzzle, returning months of devoted care in these last precious moments. Martinez prepared the injection that would end Max's suffering. "He won't feel anything but peace," she assured Tom. "He'll simply drift off to sleep." As the medication entered his system, Max's mismatched eyes found Ruby one last time. His paw tightened slightly on her muzzle. A final touch, a last connection between souls who had defied every natural law to love each other. Then, with the softest sigh, the best herding dog in Montana closed his eyes forever. Ruby remained perfectly still for several eternal moments. Then she rose slowly, standing over Max's still form, and released a sound none of them had ever heard before. A deep, mournful cry that seemed to come from the very depths of her soul. She knew. She understood complete. Her guardian, her teacher, her mother in every way that mattered, was gone forever. Ruby wouldn't leave Max's body. For 3 agonizing hours, she maintained her vigil, occasionally nudging him gently as if trying to wake him from this sleep that felt different from all the others. When Tom finally tried to move Max for burial, Ruby blocked him with pinned ears, protecting her dog even in death. "Let her process this," Dr. Martinez advised, her own eyes red with tears. "Animals need to grieve too. She needs to understand that he's not coming back, that this is final." They waited with infinite patience until Ruby finally stepped back, her head hanging low, allowing them to wrap Max in his beloved blanket. She followed the small procession to the hill where they had shared their last sunset together. Tom had chosen the spot with careful consideration, overlooking the ranch Max had served so faithfully, with a perfect view of the pasture where Ruby would continue growing up. As they lowered Max into the ground, Ruby did something that broke everyone present. She picked up a mouthful of hay from her morning feed and dropped it gently into the grave, sharing one final meal with Max, just as they had shared everything else. Then she stood back and released that mournful cry again, a sound that carried across the entire valley like a song of pure grief. The following days brought the hardest test of Ruby's young life. She returned repeatedly to their shelter, nickering for Max, searching his bed and favorite spots with heartbreaking persistence. She refused to eat, standing listlessly in the paddock, her spark completely extinguished. The confident, well-trained foal became a shadow of herself. "She's going to waste away," Sarah worried, watching Ruby ignore her feed for the 3rd consecutive day. "She's giving up, just like Max almost did before he found her." Tom tried everything he could think of. He brought other dogs to visit, hoping for connection. Ruby ignored them completely. He attempted Max's familiar commands, but his voice wasn't the right one. Ruby would look at him with such profound sadness that Tom felt like an intruder in their private language. On the 4th night, Tom sat with Ruby in the empty shelter, Max's collar in his hands. "I know you miss him terribly," he said quietly. "I miss him too, more than words can say. But he wouldn't want this, Ruby. He worked too hard to keep you alive for you to give up now. He loved you too much for that." Ruby sniffed the collar, and something shifted in her intelligent expression. She walked slowly to Max's empty bed, pawing at it gently, then looked at Tom with those eyes Max had nurtured so carefully. Slowly, deliberately, she walked to her hay net and began to eat. "That's my girl," Tom whispered through his tears. "That's Max's girl." Recovery wasn't immediate or easy. Ruby developed new habits that honored Max's memory in the most beautiful way. Every morning she'd visit his grave, standing quietly for several minutes before starting her day. She'd run through their obstacle course alone, but now with purpose rather than grief. As if showing Max she remembered everything he'd taught her. The ranch dogs began accompanying Ruby on her morning walks. Not replacing Max, but offering gentle companionship. She accepted them gradually, even learning to communicate with them in her unique horse-dog hybrid language that Max had helped create. But every evening she returned to the shelter alone, maintaining her faithful vigil. Tom had Max's collar mounted on a plaque in the barn, surrounded by photographs of their impossible partnership. Underneath, Sarah had written, "Max and Ruby, proving love knows no boundaries." Ruby would often stand before it, touching her nose to the collar, remembering everything they had shared. She was growing into a magnificent young horse, carrying all of Max's training and boundless love with her wherever she went. Her responses to commands, her unusual discipline, her gentle nature with smaller animals, all echoes of a border collie's profound influence. "He's still with her," Sarah observed one day, watching Ruby carefully step around a nest of barn kittens, something most horses would never notice. Everything he taught her, every lesson, every moment of love, Max is still here in how she moves through the world. Ruby had become a living memorial to the love between a broken-down herding dog and an orphaned foal. Their bond had transcended death itself, living on in every gentle gesture, every patient moment, every time Ruby chose kindness over instinct. Max had given Ruby life. Now Ruby would live that life in a way that honored him completely. Brave, gentle, and overflowing with love, just exactly as her dog had taught her to be. 1 year later, the Patterson Ranch had become a place of pilgrimage. Word of Max and Ruby's story had spread far beyond Montana, touching hearts across the world. But what happened next proved that their bond had created something truly eternal. Ruby, now a stunning yearling with all the confidence Max had instilled, had taken on a remarkable new role. When the Pattersons brought in orphaned or rejected foals, Ruby would immediately adopt them, showing the same patient, devoted care Max had shown her. "Watch this miracle," Tom would tell visitors, leading them to the nursery paddock. Ruby stood protectively with a weak foal whose mother had died during birth. The baby was skinny, frightened, refusing all bottles. Ruby nickered softly. That special sound Max had taught her meant absolute safety. She lowered her head, allowing the foal to huddle beneath her neck for comfort. Then, incredibly, Ruby began demonstrating how to drink from a bucket, repeatedly and patiently, exactly as Max had shown her. Within hours, the orphaned foal was copying her movements, trust replacing terror. "She's become Max," Sarah marveled, watching this extraordinary scene unfold. "She's passing on everything he taught her to the next generation." Ruby's protective instincts extended beyond horses. Barn kittens napped safely between her hooves. Injured chickens recovered in her shelter. An orphaned calf was often seen following her around the pasture. Ruby teaching it boundaries with the same patient persistence Max had used with her. The Pattersons established the Max Memorial Foal Rescue, with Ruby as their cornerstone. Orphaned foals from across the state were brought to learn from Max's most successful student. Ruby's success rate was perfect. Every foal thrived under her unconventional care, learning not just to survive but to trust and love. On the second anniversary of Max's passing, something magical happened that proved their connection transcended every boundary. Ruby was working with a particularly difficult colt, aggressive, fearful, rejected by multiple foster mares. Nothing Ruby tried was working. As sunset approached, she led the troubled colt to the hill overlooking Max's grave. She stood quietly, the colt beside her, and waited. Then Ruby did something she'd never done before. She barked. It wasn't quite right. Horses aren't built for barking, but the intent was crystal clear. "Ruby," she managed, the same sound Max had used to name her. The colt's ears pricked forward, confusion replacing aggression. Ruby barked again, then demonstrated the calm behavior she expected. The colt, perhaps recognizing something primal in this horse, who spoke dog, took a tentative step closer. By the time the sun set, he was leaning against Ruby, accepting the comfort she offered. "Max taught her that love transcends species," Tom said, wiping away tears. "Now she's teaching others. His legacy isn't just in one horse, it's in every life Ruby touches." Today, 5 years after that first miraculous meeting, Ruby continues her work. She has saved 43 foals, each one learning Max's lessons through her patient guidance. The shelter where Max spent his final months has been preserved as a monument to impossible love. Visitors often ask if the story is real. Tom simply points to Ruby, surrounded by foals she's nurturing, occasionally making soft sounds that aren't quite horse and aren't quite dog. In those moments, everyone understands the truth. Max may have been just a retired herding dog with bad joints and a failing heart, but love transformed him into something more. Love made him a mother, a teacher, a bridge between species that shouldn't have connected but did. And through Ruby, that love continues rippling outward like circles on water, touching lives Max never could have imagined. Some bonds are too powerful for death to break. They live on in every kindness, every patient moment, every time someone chooses love over logic. Max and Ruby proved that family isn't about species or blood. It's about who shows up when you need them most, and who loves you enough to teach you how to love others. Max showed up for Ruby. Ruby shows up for others. And somewhere across the Rainbow Bridge, an old border collie, with one blue eye and one brown, watches his horse daughter with infinite pride. The best herding dog in Montana is still working. He's just herding hearts now, one rescued foal at a time.